welcome everyone. I'm really excited for the next 40 minutes for the panel Beyond PoCs, so proof of concepts, choosing and operationalizing a conversational AI platform for enterprise scale. My name is Alex. I'm the co-founder and CEO here over at Rasa, and I'm super excited to have this panel here with leading experts in the field that have seen a lot of enterprise scale. But before we dive into the discussion, I just kind of wanted to quickly introduce the topic a little bit. So when we talk about proof of concepts, I think everyone here in the audience is aware that basically almost all companies in the world have run certain proof of concepts and pilot projects in conversational AI, text-based, voice-based. Of course, all started with Facebook Messenger opening up their platform in 2016 and all the other developments that have happened since then, right? And so if you look at conversational AI and assistants as the next kind of wave of interfaces, the question really becomes how are they built, right? I mean, people know how web apps and mobile apps are built. So there's kind of an idea of what platforms you can use to build them, but also processes, how to operationalize them and really ship these applications. But I think that question is a bit unclear still when it comes to conversational AI. And so when we talk about a conversational AI platform, what we really mean is the foundational technology for developing a chatbot and a voice assistant. That's at least how Gartner is defining it, but I think it's actually a pretty good, neat definition. And then the question really becomes what does it mean in practice, right? Because everyone wants to be a platform these days. That's how billion-dollar companies are built. So if you mark yourself as a platform, that's a safe way to get there. But that's really not the point of the discussion here today, right? So it's really more practical, what have been people in the enterprise have seen being useful for them. And so when you think about that, the way how I look at conversational AI, it really connects your business and your customers, right? So on the one hand side, you have customers that connect you on a lot of different channels and a lot of different places. And then you have your company and the business logic in your company, right? And basically a conversational AI platform really sits in the middle, and it can be text-based or voice-based. So voice meaning, for example, also telephony. And then it really becomes this question around how can you automate conversations with your customers? For example, on let's say a mobile app or Telegram is another conversational channel, and basically get a response from something in your company, right? And that might be a knowledge base, it might be some API, it might be some robotic process automation, it might be actually a human agent as well if you want to route to that person. And so when we talk about enterprise scale, this is basically just much, much bigger, right? And so it's not just this two channels that I just described. It's not just a mobile app and Telegram, but it's maybe Facebook Messenger, maybe it's Android, maybe it's some other channels that you use, maybe it's your call center, right? But then it's also not just this one system or couple of systems that you would plug into in a smaller company, but just gazillions of systems. And that's just an example of what enterprise scale means, what we see out there in the wild. And it's not just limited to that. Because in the end, if you are in a larger company, you've probably certain quality assurance processes that you need to follow, certain approval processes. You might have complete other human languages, right? Natural languages. You might be in different geographic markets in the world. You probably have a larger team that is working on that. So you need to figure out how you can basically dissect your assistant into smaller pieces. You have certain requirements around deployment. And you just have increased traffic, right? You have millions of conversations, and handling this is not only a question of deployment, but also so many other questions that are related to that. And so in addition to that, coming back to this team, what we also see happening in large companies a lot is that you basically form multidisciplinary teams to really build and then run these text and voice-based assistants. So they would have maybe a product owner, conversation designer, data scientists, developers, content owners. And so they all work together the same way as those types of teams also work together to maybe ship a mobile app or a web application to really build this assistant. And so with this super quick introduction, I want to get going into our discussion, and I'm really excited for all the folks that have been able to join here today, all of them have seen enterprise scale, all of them have seen conversational AI. And to kick things off, I would love to for all of you to just quickly introduce yourselves, and then we get going.
Sure. So my name is Vineet Malhotra. I'm part of work for Mercer, part of Marsh McLennan Companies. I lead a digital team called Alpha Labs. We do rapid product development, and increasingly conversational AI is at the core of many of the experiences that we not only have been experimenting with, but to Alex's point, we're looking at scaling across the enterprise as well.
Cool, thank you. Dennis, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me, Alex. I'm Dennis Yang. I am the lead product manager for conversational AI at Chime. Chime is a technology company that provides banking services, primarily for the mission of we believe that everyone deserves kind of financial peace of mind. So that's Chime. Prior to this, I've been a part of kind of 5 different startups since 1997. My last startup was is a company called Dashbot that we provide analytics and optimization for conversational interfaces like chatbots. So that's where I've got the bulk of my experience in this industry, and I'm excited to chat about what that means for enterprises.
Cool, thanks, Dennis. Sweta, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hi, Alex. Thanks for inviting. This is great. And hi, everyone. I'm Sweta Patel, product management leader in conversational AI space. I've built a few large-scale conversational AI products over the past 7 years. One of them is Erica from Bank of America, and another one is Oracle Digital Assistant from Oracle. It's an enterprise play. And currently, I'm driving product transformation at Juniper Networks and advising some startups in this space as well.
Cool, thank you. And then Casey, what's next?
Hey, Alex, thanks for inviting me. Really excited for the panel. Again, my name is Casey Phillips. I've been working in the chatbot space for going around 5 years now from a product management perspective. So I've had the opportunity to launch and build several chatbots for larger companies. And right now, my focus is on bringing a lot of the AI and ML modeling that's on the chatbot side, and really bridging that over to the actual transition between the chatbot and the live expert experience. So really excited for the panel.
Cool, awesome. Well, I think we can just dive right into it. I mean, I mentioned Gartner earlier. I think the report that I was quoting has been like one of many that they've done in this field. And I think if you talk to them, they will tell you that there are about like 2,000 like vendors of conversational AI worldwide, right? Like it's a huge amount. And so I think what would be really interesting for the audience to get started with today is really like, from your experience, like what different approaches have you seen in the enterprise to build text or voice-based assistant or both? And maybe also talking a little bit about like the trade-offs that you've seen, because of course not like one size fits it all, right? And I think that's something that would be super interesting to get a little deeper on.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of kick it off with some of my thoughts. So I know for me, working for just larger companies in the chatbot space, I find one of the most heated debates that I see that comes up is kind of the actual debate on should you have like more bots or like fewer bots. Because I think when you're dealing with like a large company, like if it's Intuit, I previously worked at ADP, like these are large companies that, there's probably, I mean, there's so many different use cases for chatbots. I mean, you're talking about different products, you're talking about completely different kind of subsets of user questions that, for me, like one of the kind of hottest topics that always seems to come up is that do you try to have fewer bots that are kind of more complex and that there's a lot more rules and there's a lot more logic and they're just a lot beefier, they're answering a lot more questions? Or do you try to more so fragment it and have more bots that are a little bit more like defined and a little bit like simpler, and like the logic isn't as complex? You can probably kind of move and like you have a little more agility, but then it kind of comes to the conversation about just building like consistent experiences. So if you think about the easiest way to have like a consistent conversational AI experience on on a large enterprise level would be to have fewer bots. But then again, like that takes more time. Like I find like if you have like fewer bots, again, more complex, you can't move quite as quick. So then on the other side of the fence, you have this concept of having more bots, and they're smaller, you can move a lot quicker, but then you really have to kind of get things dialed down from an operations and like from a people and processes standpoint to keep all these different teams and all these different chatbots in check. So that way, if someone's having a conversation with a chatbot in QuickBooks or TurboTax, or for example, and maybe you're in like different countries, you're still getting that kind of consistent experience. So I find like that for me has always been like one of the kind of most contentious topics from enterprise chatbots.
It's a really good one. It's a philosophical question.
Yeah, it is.
The metabot question.
Those are great points, Casey. And I think that for me, it sort of relates to the way I'm looking at the like when essentially a company takes these conversational AI experiences and transitions them from typically like the innovation team over to the kind of the business units. The key difference here is that the goal behind creating these conversational AIs or chatbots shifts from make this because it's new and do this for a certain business purpose. And I think that sort of speaks to what Casey is saying also, which is, the decision that determines whether or not you should make multiple chatbots or not really boils down to the first decision and point that I think you need to make when you transition into the real business unit, which is why are you doing these, why are you making these conversational interfaces at all? It sort of looks back at, the web days and the mobile days. It used to be you would have a mobile team and a web team. And now essentially, these are essentially solution stacks that are addressing kind of real business problems. And that to me is like the single biggest shift when you shift from innovation to enterprise, is it no longer becomes, we're doing this because it's new. We're doing this because this solution is the best solution for the problem. And I actually find it a little bit odd that, as a product manager, I guess my title is heading the conversational AI team, and that's a solution first product manager. But I think that role and of my goal, my mission is to essentially like be the consistent platform with which the rest of the product managers around my organization are deploying kind of conversational AI solutions. And in the same way that the centralized design systems teams are looking to make sure that the consistency of design systems are deployed across the company, my mission really is to make sure that there's a consistent approach, framework, and voice deployed across the rest of the enterprise as we develop more and more conversational AI. So definitely, like Casey, I hear your pain when, do we make one assistant or several assistants? Huge issue. But I think that the foundation upon which I can send that kind of message across my company is that here are the best practices when deploying enterprise assistants across our company, and make sure that we do that in an efficient and consistent way.
Yeah. I think those are great points. And if I may chime in, some of these strategic objectives that are identified in enabling conversational AI interfaces, are critical to identify and do a deep dive ahead of time or early on, before we go into the solution space, right? Because the solution space sort of looks like, at least I classify it into 3 different areas where you can integrate these solutions into existing digital assistants, right? The existing Siris and the Google Nows and the IoT bots, sort of a channel access, or you can have a hybrid of, utilize open source APIs and then sort of build the business workflows and processes inside there. Or then you go completely customized environment and completely customized platform, depending on the complexities that are associated with these strategic initiatives, right? So I think that is fundamental to sort of finding a path on where the roadmap for the product, and also from a customer service point of view, the design integrations, the use cases offered, the value addition, and the CX identification, all of that sort of comes in from that identification of what the enterprise strategy is. Speaking about trade-offs on scale, I do agree with you guys on the multiple bots versus, one bot that sort of has multiple skills aspect of it. And I've sort of seen both. I've actually had Erica, for example, is a great implementation, which is pretty much a banking expert, and she actually walks the users through many really good financial use cases, and sort of learns and proactively helps them manage, right? Whereas some of the other implementations that I've seen have been more specific and leaner in their use cases and not as complex, but yet they are simpler from a UX point of view for providing that customer service. So I think it depends from a scale point of view. And to Alex's previous slides, one of the things that you mentioned, Alex, is the channels increase as the scale increases, as the scale of customer interaction increases, the variety of the term we call omni-channel presence, right? That increases, and that also brings its own set of interaction challenges and also design scale for the conversational AI. So I think some of these are very, very fundamental. Again, it rolls back into what the original strategic objective is for the enterprise.
Totally. I think if you thought that it's hard to build like a mobile app on both Android and iOS at the same time, welcome to the conversational world. I think that's even trickier. Sorry, Vineet, I interrupted you. Go ahead, please.
No, you're right. I was going to say, there's some really interesting perspectives that I'm going to try not to repeat what the guys have just said. One of the things that we've benefited from is that you look at it from a home life and a work life perspective. Thanks to the home life experience that our colleagues have in our company, they're using Google Assistant, Alexa, Siri, etc. So they're reasonably familiar, more so in the last 12 plus months, in terms of automating various things at home. And there's always been this expectation, when people talk about conversational AI in the workspace, they always lean on, hey, why can't I do an Alexa in the workplace kind of thing. There's been some sort of education that's already happened because people are familiar with these experiences. So the approach we take is that we from a tech perspective, I always sort of say, the tech can scale. Like, rest assured, the technology will scale, but can the experience scale? That's the challenge, right? Can we create something so the experience can scale as well? And how often do we design experiences to scale? And then when it comes to scaling the experience with conversational AI, the approach that I've taken is to sort of say to various business teams and product teams is, if you want to put a chatbot or a virtual assistant experience on your product, let's look at the behavioral side of this, like awareness, access and action. Like, how are you going to make people aware of what your bot can do and that they should use it for a particular set of use cases? How are you going to eliminate all the friction so they can access all of that cool functionality? And then, are you going to bring actions to the user with the chatbot? Are you going to take them to the actions in other applications? So I'm trying to take more of a behavioral psychology view of this, because the technology has matured so much, and we've been using Rasa one way or another for a while now. We know the tech scales. It's not even about the technology so much anymore. It's about really applying it and creating experiences that can scale as well.
I think that's a really great point, actually, about the experiences scaling versus the tech. I think it's a also angle that we at least see out there in the wild, being sometimes not only a challenge of conversational AI itself, right? I think like a lot of the backend connectors, etc., in large companies are still sometimes not in a place where you can actually create those experiences, right? I mean, I'm always joking when traveling and visiting customers in real life was still a thing before COVID. I always tried to connect my MacBook just to like a presenter in a room, and it usually never worked, right? And I mean, it's a small example of integrating things together in a company, but at least I think that's the challenge that we all see all the time.
Yeah,
Cool.
I mean, so, I guess in addition to the technology scaling is, I really think the transition between innovation and enterprise is also making sure that the organization and the processes scale behind it as well. I think typically I see one person making a chatbot kind of when it's an innovation, right? So they're making the training data, they're designing the intents, they're designing the conversation, they're doing everything. And that's really easy because it's just one person. But then how do you actually make that scale when you're trying to do it with, there's too much work for one person. So then how do you then start splitting up and creating different roles, different teams, different processes, and also then tying in like knowledge management all across the organization. That's what really I think enterprise scale means. Is like how do you create conversational interfaces when you shift from a team of one who knows everything into a team of 10, 20, 30 plus people that have kind of stakeholders all around the organization, and they're coordinating information and processes all across. And how do you keep growing, right, from that point?
Yeah, and I think you guys are highlighting two very key areas there, right? One is knowledge management, as you mentioned, really the aggregation of data sources, and it's specifically tied around the plethora of use cases that we want to deliver to the users, right? And then the other is the processes, which is variety of processes from different departments. Product has its own life cycle, IT has its own operations, sort of, how they deal with and stuff, and these things. One of the critical things conversational AI technology brings is it demands aggregation of multifaceted processes and knowledge base in a way that no other system so far has actually demanded, right? Because this is a unified interaction, and it's one entity that interacts with the customer. It's not a mobile app with multiple menu that the customer can click, and it sort of forks off different processes in the back end. This doesn't work like that. So I think that is a huge challenge in enterprise, from a scale point of view and implementation point of view, that teams have to work on in the back end. And I think majority of the time is actually spent in aggregating these two things, really, the data and the processes. And the more integrated this is, the higher the quality of the conversational AI experience, in my opinion.
It's actually a great point. And maybe something
speaking of risks.
Go ahead. Sorry, I think there was a time delay.
No, go ahead. I was going to add a risk. We were talking about risk. I was going to add the risk of with conversational AI, to Sweta's point. Another risk is that conversational AIs are becoming, well, the expectation is that they should be less and less binary. Like so early days AI, when it was I think Dennis, you talked about like a guy spinning up a chatbot, putting it out there, really binary FAQ sort of stuff being served up. It's great first impressions, early days, but now the expectations have changed. Users, your clients expect it to be less binary. They want to have it's conversational AI. So they want to go down different sort of threaded conversations, be led in different directions. And so there's a lot of expectation management. Of course, the risk with these kinds of experiences that it's brutal. You get it wrong, and it's not a case of not coming back. It's your app is deleted. So it's a really careful sort of needle to thread. You've got to sort of figure out how you make them less binary, how you train your models to be more sophisticated. I think we're still learning and getting better at it. We're not where we need to be, but it's something we've got to be really conscious of as well. It's a real risk.
Casey, maybe if you think about your team at Intuit, like how does it look now? Like who's part of it, and also maybe how has that evolved over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of teams involved right now in regards to just everything we're doing in conversational AI at Intuit. It's really grown a lot over the last few years. I mean, I would say right now conversational AI spans at least like 3 different orgs and several different teams, and it's very similar to kind of what you were showing in the other slide. Like you've got like your data science piece, you've got like your product owners, you've got your conversation designers. You've also got like the people that Dennis has been talking to, more so like the platform, like the innovation side, and then like you've got the people that stay on the BU. So there's definitely a lot of players, and I really like the point that Dennis brought up earlier, just kind of really saying that as you try to really scale these experiences in an enterprise environment, just like the focus on really having things nailed down from like the people and processes and just alignment is so important, because it can become very easy for teams to kind of like drift off. And as we mentioned too, like if coming to the back to where we kind of kicked off the conversation about like one chatbot, if you're having or if you're an organization, you decide like, hey, like we actually need to kind of spin off multiple chatbots, and then like you really need the alignment from those teams, because every single chatbot is going to be an extension of your brand. So if one chatbot performs great, the other doesn't perform well, like that an experience that you want. You want users to kind of have a certain expectation of all the chatbots that your organization would have if you have multiple. I think as well, like one of the where I've seen kind of like a roadblock that's been hard for teams to kind of get over is when you have all these teams in the conversational AI space, but then you try to get over the hurdle of globalization as well. It's always been something that's been really challenging, and figure out how do you support chatbots in multiple countries and in multiple languages. And then it gets to, I think from my standpoint, that's always been one of the hardest things. I think in an enterprise company, once you try and go global with the chatbots, the amount of teams and the amount of players you have just it exemplifies, because now you're talking like you need to have like people from each of those countries who are like experts on how you train the chatbot in that country. So it really kind of extrapolates, the amount of, people that you have working on your chatbots. I think globalization, from my standpoint, has always been one of the biggest challenges.
That's actually a very critical point you're bringing up, because as the scale, the globalization of chatbots or conversational AI, I want to really extend that, because we're going through the shift from chatbot into digital assistants as well. And I think the teams involved are getting deeper and deeper into complexities, and hence the scale occurs, and it distributes from a geo point of view as well, because even if the business workflow is the same, from one country to the other, the language interaction brings its own set of variety on how that, experience, the natural language interaction experience sort of scales. And I've seen where, we've had to sort of build design teams in different countries just to cater to that language experience, right? Not just like it's one thing to have a data set and have a conversational AI built for interacting in that language, but then it's a whole other thing to test and verify and understand the CX of it, and then bring that in and tune the algorithms for that particular geo. So I think that there's the complexity definitely goes multifold. And then I think the risk and compliance, as Vineet earlier mentioned it in a different context, but still, that extends as well, because what's applicable here from a compliance point of view isn't exactly the same snapshot in all other countries that scale occurs. So I think I think it's I'm beginning to observe that there are the unified teams that are geo-specific that are being expanded into different geographies.
Yeah, and I think here also there's a big difference between shipping it once and having to continue to ship it over time, right, and improve, because it's what you do if you come out of POC stage and actually have a product, in fact, that you're building, I think, in many ways. And then I think if you have to internationalize once, it might be easy, and then you don't have to look at it ever again. But then if you have to improve that over time as well, I think that's really where the challenge comes in. And I mean, we talked about this a little bit, but people and processes really, how can you make sure that they are set up so they can continue to ship quickly as well and improve the customer experience. I mean, all of that complexity, and I mean, I think the 40 minutes for today are certainly not enough to get into all the weeds and complexities of the enterprise and what at scale really means. But I think we touched on a couple of points already. But if you think about it from your standpoint, picking the right platform, what really matters? Because certainly you can't have it all. I think that's also a pretty clear insight here from the discussion. So you have to make choices, right? And if you think about the top 3 criteria for you choosing a conversational AI platform, what would that be?
Yeah, I think it depends because it again speaking back to that strategic objective on what an enterprise is trying to gain out of it. It really depends on the classification of which type of platform. But I think some of the fundamental categories, and then to me, number one is really the business flow, that implementation assessment that we're trying to gain after. The second is really the variety of data and really the variability in data more so than the actual data set and how a system handles that, right, as to the scaling of the variability of data set or even just the reuse of the static data set and just multiplying it in different languages or whatnot. So I think that's another one. And I actually have four, not three, because infrastructure, I think, is a very critical aspect of this, right? And that speaks to some of the risk and compliance, privacy, and also scalability of how the what's the volume of customer base you're trying to look for, what's the complexity of the operations and stuff, and hence, which type of systems or which type of solutions out there or homegrown, what type of demands, infrastructure demands these things have. And then the fourth one that's more emerging now recently, as opposed to a lot more before, is analytics, right? The ability to drive analytics and feed towards the customizations of the digital assistants to cater to specific use cases with customers or personalization eventually. I think that level of scale is also to be considered when it comes to picking the technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I look at choosing an enterprise platform is really you start with your objective and then look at the entire process end to end as far as like the pieces that you need to create when creating, these conversational AI. So, if you think about like all of the requirements that are there, it's yes, at the very base level, is the technology like good enough? Is it accurate enough to do your purpose? But then actually, I think the larger pieces that I'm really looking at are things like, what does the deployment process look like? When this is deployed in the enterprise, what does version control look like? What does experimentation look like? Is there a good experimentation solution, as in this is integrated with analytics? Can I understand, how certain, dialogue flows or stories perform when they're in production? And can I really kind of break those down at a granular level? In terms of training, like how am I going to do validation in an automated fashion when I'm improving my models and training data? And how do I version these and attach these to the analytics that are being generated when I have these assistants in production? These are the types of questions that really I'm starting to ask, as we're maturing as an organization that are using these interfaces. It's like, how do I scale the improvement and the processes, and what does that look like as I choose a platform? Have all of these factors that enterprises care about, versioning, experimentation, analytics. What do those solutions look like when you're actually evaluating these solutions? One actually, just little stories like, multiplayer is, I think, very, very fascinating. Meaning, like, if you look at how joyful it is to design in Figma, where, it's amazing to see multiple people working on the same exact document. And that really, I think, speaks to, the strength that I think that product management team understanding that this is how these, Figma is used in production. So, I want to see, what does it feel like when I have a team of people working on, these systems? Like, do we run into each other? How do we coordinate, versioning? How do we coordinate who's working on what? Because those are the real types of day-to-day problems that we'll be facing as we are, working on these interfaces. So those are the, again, it just really speaks to, it feels like when you're maturing these platforms and solutions, the ability to experiment, to have more than one person work on them, the ability to validate and test, like, these are all concerns that speak to the fact that these are real applications being used for real things by millions of people.
Yeah, and I really like the point that you just made, Dennis, too, about just, how does the platform allow people on your team to actually work? And I would just add to kind of piggyback on, I think another thing that would be important to me, kind of top of mind look at the platform, is just like from like the core platform functionality, like how difficult is it to actually go in there and build chatbots and conversations? Because I'm sure everyone's had the experience where I've worked with on some chatbot platforms where it feels like for someone to actually go in and just kind of like design and develop very simple, basic chatbot conversations, that they almost need to be like an engineer, have like an engineering background. And you really don't want that, because that's going to make it very hard on an enterprise level to truly scale. Because as we mentioned, like there's so many people and players involved, and to think that everyone on the teams is going to be able to think like an engineer is just not feasible. And you're always going to want those people on the team that, you know, don't come from an engineering background, but they truly understand like the customer problem. They understand like how to like actually like design like good conversational experiences, but they don't know how to code and they don't have any engineering experience. So you really need a platform that allows a lot of that core functionality to be very simple, so you can have more people involved. Like you definitely want the platform to be able to have the more advanced capabilities, but you shouldn't have to be having someone with engineering experience going in there and like creating and authoring your most basic conversation flows. Like you should just really have someone that truly understands the customer problem, and understand what's the experience that the customers need, and they can go in there and actually do it. From my standpoint, I think that really enables you to actually be able to scale and grow a lot faster. I think if you have to constantly have that go through someone with an engineering background, and that really kind of slows things up.
I mean, I would add to that the sort of ease of use kind of comment that you made, Casey, and I would sort of say integration and interoperability are really important as well, because I don't want to create we started the conversation with, we don't want to create an army of chatbots. We'd rather have a plethora of use cases or problems we can solve. And so the reality is that I don't want to, I want to be introducing experiences where there's applications already there in an organization. People are using 15, 20, 30 different applications for different things. There is an opportunity to use a conversational UI or an AI to actually solve problems and make things more efficient, and have this enterprise workflow orchestration that works with the chatbot, so I can go from one application to 5 others without thinking about it anymore. I'm just focusing on the task that needs to be done. So this requires a whole new level of interoperability and ease of integration, where I'm focusing more on end-to-end journeys that span 15 applications sometimes. And there's workflow orchestration and there's notifications. But for once, after a long time with conversational AI, we have something really delightful to do that. Like it's almost magical when it works. You know, you kind of go, wow. Like I've just probably gone through 5 applications and I didn't even realize it, because I was just having a conversation. And I think that's the promise of what we're talking about.
Yeah, totally. And I think here also it probably won't be just like one platform that, you know, just provides that all out of the box in a simple to use UI, right? Because I think if anything, enterprises are extremely complex, and that's probably something that a lot of people wish would exist, but I guess in many ways doesn't exist until today. And it reminds me what you just said, Vineet, is when we first got started with Rasa, I was visiting a call center, and what agents did there is basically to, like, of course, listen to what the customers tells them and like trying to translate that into the business logic of the company. And then they would just look at like 6 or 7 different screens, which all ran like different like programs and different tools basically, and then input that data in there, right? And I think that's also what you just described across these like different applications that run somewhere in the back end. And I also think that's a big price for sure to be won. We have like only 2 minutes left, and I feel like we just got started. So I hope we can continue this conversation again at another conference that we host, or maybe in a separate webinar or something like that. But maybe just to super quickly wrap it up, from each of you, like if you think about like success, right? Like, and maybe just like throw it out there, and that's maybe the teaser for the next panel that we organize. How would you measure success for an assistant, or how have you measured it so far?
Yeah, I think to you know, from my perspective, to kind of piggyback on what Dennis has said before, like I think it just really varies on like the use case of your organization and what you're kind of going for. I know, like in a lot of the enterprise organizations that I've worked on chatbots with, generally speaking, the primary goal has been kind of like containment, like reducing the contacts, so like keeping, you know, being able to automate self-help questions that users have and prevent them from having to go with someone in the contact center. So like, at least in the chatbots that I've worked on, like that's been kind of the predominant goal and metric. And whether you're measuring the rate of automation, or you're just measuring containment, but it's generally been more so containment focused. But again, I think to kind of piggyback on what Dennis has said before, really varies on your org, and in some orgs that may not be the actual primary goal or metric that you're going to look at. But at least that's been the case for me historically.
Yeah, I think there are two aspects to measuring success, right? One, as you mentioned, Casey, it's the customer experience aspect of it, right? That okay, how much of the self-help and the frequency of use and even going from repetitive use to increasing or expansion in the use cases and adoption, right? So that really is a good measure for success. But I think internally from enterprises as well, the operational efficiency that this thing brings, and the integration of data and really the optimizations of the manual work. One of the examples you mentioned, Alex, is contact center agents looking at 5-10 different screens and then aggregating that information and putting it in. So really that's internally, that's also a measure of success. And that's really what's very closely tied to some of the ROI initiatives, on this strategic aspect. So I would say it's twofolds from observation.
Yeah, I guess for me, I guess
say my
success.
Experience.
Okay. Go ahead, Vineet.
So please go ahead, Dennis. Go ahead.
So I'm looking at success from the perspective of, how can I basically improve the lives of my members, right? So I'm primarily focusing on satisfaction and happiness and joy. In terms of like I want my customers and members, when they interact with my chatbot, to truly have like an amazing experience. And if they want to talk to my agents, like, great, we're going to get them there as quickly as possible. If that's what, if that's what's going to make that make them resolve their issue more quickly. So that's sort of exciting. The other thing I would say in terms of like measuring success is that I think the focus for me is really around like the solution. And not, I guess, the problem that we're solving, which is, did we get an answer to your question as quickly as possible, and not necessarily around the fact that it was delivered by a conversational AI, right? So it's sort of like the solution itself, which I love, it's an amazing solution, should actually almost be secondary to the problems that we solve with it. And to me, that if the more that conversational AI is used in the tool chest of my fellow product managers across my organization, that's how I'm truly going to be judging my success. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's shared sort of a perspective on the value piece. What I found is that what has surprised me is how often my internal stakeholders, the different parts of the business, will come to me and say, they want to use conversational AI, or they'll call it different things, they'll call it digital assistant, virtual assistant, chatbot, but they come with a value proposition they've really thought through. Like I find that my internal clients will come and say that I would like to use this technology because it's going to help my end customers get an answer quicker, get the job done without having to make a phone call and be on hold. So they come with a very clear value proposition. So we focus on solving for that almost immediately. And even internally, we also use conversational AIs for our internal colleague experience as well. And it's all about time efficiencies. I found that the ROI calculation of the value piece has been pretty straightforward. It's people have thought through where the value is, and that's what we focus on. Maybe it wasn't the case 4 years ago, but I feel like there's been a level of maturity that teams have achieved now in this space.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think also a great finish for the discussion, because I think in the end everyone can kind of understand like what an automated conversation could look like, right? I think it's just really about making it happen, and I'm really happy that the four of you were here today and shared your lessons learned. I think what I also take from that is like enterprise scale is complex, and I think having a panel on that is also something super worthwhile having, but there's so many more things to go much more into depth. And I hope like for the audience today, that at least like helps you to ask a couple of the important questions. And I think some of them might be answered in other sessions at Rasa Summit. And if not, I think we'll also be here for questions afterwards today. So thank you all, and yeah, have a good rest of the day.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Thank
Thanks,
you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex.